The story began when the blood moon rose and disaster struck. Original sin has descended. Has there been a turning point in the world? For him it's just a game. All because he has money and power. The board said that the player could use the points to exchange for original sin coins. The exchange rate is 1 to 10. The main character sat on a throne that was strewn with gold coins. While others are fighting for their lives in dungeons, he earns billions effortlessly. Emptying the store, awakening supernatural abilities, constantly winning with teammates. Who else is capable of this? He was chosen to be a rescuer. One cool day the hero stood near the gate. Loaders were transferring goods from the truck. Jinyu approached him. He folded his hands awkwardly and said, "Xiao Yun, if it weren't for him, the orphanage would have had to be closed a long time ago. He doesn't even know how to thank him." The hero raised his hand and smiled good-naturedly and said not to worry, he does all this from the bottom of his heart. Information appeared on the scoreboard that he received 500 points for his merits. Current balance, 11,451,143 points. He turned around and put his hands in his pockets and walked forward. He thought about having the system close the display. His name is Lin Guiyun. He has neither a home nor a car, and his parents died. And also, standing in front of the fence, he waved his hand and shouted, "Uncle Lu, please open up." The man said, "Just a second." And then he took a glass of hot drink and asked, "Is he doing good deeds again?" The hero laughed awkwardly. He scratched the back of his head and said that this was the last wish of his parents. He is tied to the system. On the board it was written that the name was Lin Guiyun. Age 18. Gender male. Associated with the merit system. Then he went further and used the key to open the door. He said, "Here he is at home." He passed a photo of his family and moved on. 2 years ago, his parents left the system and a single message before disappearing without a trace. Under the blood moon it was said, "Blood red eyes are watching, a great catastrophe is approaching." How to cross the sea of suffering? Only by receiving merit. The hero was sitting at the table and holding a glass of water in his hands. He took a sip and thought that for 2 whole years he had been doing good deeds, receiving more and more merit. However, the scoreboard said the number of merit points was 11,451,143. The available balance was 0. He loudly placed the glass on the table and thought, what does using merit points even mean? A red drop fell into his glass. The water in the glass turned bloody. He jumped back in fear from this. Guiyun looked out the window and saw that the blood moon had risen over the city. His eyes opened in horror. He jumped on the spot and came closer to the window. The board said that they were congratulating him. He qualified as an original sin player. The first copy will open in 23 hours 59 minutes 59 seconds. His face was covered in sweat. He repeated, "Of original sin. What is this?" He touched the red liquid and looked at the stained finger and said that it felt like it was real. Everything around him began to distort. He looked around and asked what to do now. A bright flash appeared in front of him. He asked, "Has it disappeared?" He looked at the scoreboard and asked, "Merit system?" This said that a low-level system plugin had been detected, successfully integrating the original sin system. The consumption system is unlocked. The hero hit himself on the cheeks and thought, "Calm down, be quiet, this is not the time to panic." He extended his hand to the scoreboard and asked, "Is the system, the invitation to the game still valid?" It said that he had access to email. He thought the countdown was still going on. It looks like he has nowhere to run. There are 23 hours 40 minutes 41 seconds left before the opening of the first instance. He looked at his phone and thought, there must be at least something about what was happening. He scored in the search, the game of original sin. His phone vibrated. He thought it was a warning. The screen on his phone said that they had discovered that he was searching for the keyword game original sin. If he received an invitation, he should visit their archive with detailed information. If he heard about the game from another person, he needs to contact them. He took a closer look and said that there was even an official website. It looks like the game has been around for quite some time. First, he will have to believe that the game of original sin is not a fiction. The Human Security Bureau exists to respond quickly to the situation. Note, the game may contain many monsters and events that defy science and common sense. Please pay utmost attention to your safety. Try to survive and complete the task. If the task fails, there will be serious consequences. By completing missions, he will be able to receive various rewards, treasures, special abilities, and even the fulfillment of his deepest desires. The hero looked at the photo of gold coins. It was written that the outcome of the game concerned not only his own life. They wish you luck. He said that the game is filled from head to toe with monsters, supernatural phenomena, where failure entails serious consequences, but at the same time, successful completion of tasks brings rewards. This means there are both risks and opportunities. He opened the system and said, is the base plugin compatible? It seems to have some advantages in the beginning. He thought that he must survive, and do not care what awaits him tomorrow. You can't die. He bit his thumb. After a while, he put on the suit and, stretching his arm to his side, thought that over the past few days he had collected food, water, warm clothes and basic medical supplies. He straightened his suit and stood in front of his collected things. Suddenly things began to disappear, space began to distort. He looked at his hands and thought, what's going on? The scoreboard said there were 15 minutes left before the game started. Please enter preliminary information in advance. His body found itself in weightlessness. He shouted, why didn't anyone tell him about this before? A few moments later he found himself at the table. He looked around. Several people were sitting next to him. Chinyu, who was sitting next to him, began to shake, after which he fell to the floor and cried out in pain. Guiyun jumped up and approached the old man and asked, Grandpa, is he okay? He extended his hand towards the hero, and then, with his help, rose to his feet. The man leaned his head on his fist and asked, are they all newbies? He hit the table with his fingers and asked, has anyone tried playing before? The girl asked him, excuse me, but is this not the first time he has participated in something like this? Is everything that was written on the internet true? The man lowered his head and continued to tap his fingers on the table and said that this was true. The information on the official website is reliable. If they become an original Sin player, then they will have to take part once a week. The guy and the girl jumped up from their seats at the same time and shouted, once a week? The man hit the table with his fist, veins appeared on his forehead, he shouted that it was so. This is a game of life and death. Will take place once a week until they die. Guiyun rested his face on his hands and thought that at first it seemed like this man was intimidating them, but in reality he just needed to share his experience with them. He will try to get him to talk, maybe he will get useful information. He then clapped his hands and said that a strong man like him couldn't have any problems surviving. Could he teach them something useful? The man raised his head and asked, should I teach? There is something. First, there is no need to interfere in other people's affairs. His life is the most valuable and important thing he has. Second, he must forget about the existence of common sense. Demons, spirits, ghosts, it's all in the game. He raised his index finger and said, and most importantly, there are a few special rules here. Violating them will lead to an even faster death than from the clutches of monsters. The main character put his finger to his chin and thought, the rules, as mentioned on the site, are changing, and they should not be broken. He doesn't understand anything. Qinglin raised her index finger and said that she had received a notification. It said that the newbie store had been unlocked. Does he know something about this? A scoreboard appeared in front of them. The girl said, oh, and she has. The guy pointed his finger at the scoreboard and said that he got it too. The man waved his hand and told them to open it and take a look. They need achievement points to buy things. They will receive them only after the completion of the first round. The girl put her finger to her chin in surprise. The guy got angry and shouted, well, what the hell is this store for, since you can't buy anything in it? Some kind of mockery. Chinyu raised his trembling hand and said, hey young man, can they get money for these points? He asked, money? An old man, he has a good imagination. Achievement points can only be exchanged for ancient artifacts that have spiritual energy. Guiyun bit his lip and looked at the scoreboard. It said, is he willing to exchange virtue points for achievement points? The exchange rate is 1 to 10. He smiled and started counting on his fingers. He thought the exchange rates were 1 to 10. He has 11,451,143 merit points. This means he can exchange 10, 100, 1,000. Over 114 million points. He imagined himself sitting strewn with money and thought, this is what they are for. Open a newbie store. The store sold the usual poison X3. 150 achievement points apiece. Mind-clearing potion X10, 200 achievement points per bottle. Invisibility talisman X3, 500 achievement points each. Basic healing, 300 achievement points apiece. Tiger X1, 30,000 achievement points each. He put his fingers to his chin and thought that, judging by the exchange rate, he only had to spend a few thousand and the store would be empty. He snapped his fingers and thought, system, Exchange 10,000 points. It was said that the exchange was 10,000 merit points. Received 100,000 achievement points. The remaining merit balance is 11,441,143 points. Regular poison has been added to his inventory. A mind-clearing potion has been added to his inventory. A demon-suppressing talisman has been added to his inventory. The white tiger is added to his inventory. He crossed his arms and thought, done. From the street we could hear another wonderful time of this year, which is being celebrated, a ghostly wedding. The girl trembled with fear and said, someone is singing. The guy turned around and looked forward in horror. Someone said that 2 lanterns were burning. The man shouted at them to shut up. He hit the table and said the game was about to begin. In a room lit by candles sat a humanoid creature. It was heard from the room, the red wax of the candles had melted, the maiden with her dowry would not return home. A board appeared in front of the team that said the task was a ghostly wedding. An additional condition is that they must survive until the end of the wedding in the mountains. They moved to an area with several more tables. Humanoid creatures sat at these tables. Qinglin looked at the table, where the creatures attacked the food. She asked what happened to them. The man folded his arms over his chest and said that it was better for her not to ask. The more curiosity, the closer her demise. Suddenly an elderly man approached them from behind. He asked why they didn't even touch the chopsticks. Qinyu shook with fear. The main character looked at the elderly man and thought that he had such a terrifying aura. He was like a dead man. The girl grabbed the man's hand and, twitching with fear, asked, Uncle, what should they do now? He looked at her and told her to just ignore him. The elderly man grimaced and asked if, on such a wonderful day, their beautiful guests decided to disrespect them? Pour them some wine. A crowd gathered around them. Guiyun thought, the residents are so pale, it's clear that they are exhausted. But the dishes on the table look luxurious. He looked at the roasted pig's head and thought that something was obviously wrong here. The girl smiled ominously and offered to drink a little. The woman took a piece of meat and, holding it out to him, told him to allow himself to be fed. Guiyun turned his head, dodging the treats. The creatures repeated, drink up. Eat. Qinyu said, okay, he will drink. The child climbed onto it and, holding out the container, said, Grandpa, drink a little. Qinyu drank the liquid and asked, are they seeing? Grandfather finished. His body took on an unhealthy hue. Foam started coming out of his mouth. He fell to the floor and grabbed his throat. The monster said, just take a sip and he's already drunk. And how was he going to last the entire banquet? Qinglin sat down next to the old man and, examining his face, said, dilated pupils, blackened veins, he is poisoned. Guiyun put his fingers to his mouth and thought, he is sure that there is poison in all food and drinks. The game is full of dangers. A sign appeared in front of him, saying that he had launched a special mission, saving lives. He must help other players, and then his merit points will increase. He thought, special mission? He looked around. His team members were surrounded by monsters. He thought there was no reaction from them. It appears to be something of a system exclusive. The girl asked with tears in her eyes, what now? We need to save him. The man threw her hand away and shouted that he told her to sit silently. It's his own fault. Saving him may put others in danger. If she wants it that way, go ahead. Guiyun said that he would help him. A pill appeared in his hand. The board said mind-clearing pill. Contains stamens of luminous grass and refined sugar. Removes toxins, effective against poisoning. He smiled and thought that the medicine from the beginner's store was much more useful than it seemed. He handed the pill to the old man's mouth. The girl said, what a pleasant smell. The man thought, this guy is a newbie, where did he get such an item? Really? The old man's body began to glow. The girl covered her mouth with her hand in surprise and said that he was able to heal the old man. The main character threw the old man's hand over his shoulder and asked if he was okay. Qinyu thanked him. Without his help he would have already died. Guiyun smiled, and then a board appeared in front of him, which said, special mission accomplished, saving lives. The content of the mission was to rescue the poisoned Qinyu. Reward 7,777 merit points. He thought, as expected. He received even more points for saving his life. He looked ahead and thought, a second, there's some kind of notification here. What is it? The sign said a ghostly wedding in the mountains. The first mission is to survive to the end of the ghostly wedding. Reward 1,500 achievement points. The second mission is to save Bai Ling's bride. Reward 3,000 achievement points, 3 items in the store. The third mission, you need to steal the statue of the Ghost of Three Rivers. Reward, 500 achievement points, 1 item in the store. The fourth mission is to find out the truth about the wedding. Reward 5,000 achievement points. He thought, does this mean there is a whole series of missions? Are there other goals in the game besides survival? The basic missions are the simplest, but the rewards are not that great. To get more rewards, you need to find hidden missions. Although he does not lack points, increasing the assortment in the store can help him. All of these missions are worth the effort. Qinglin looked around and asked, did anyone notice where the villagers went? Everyone looked around in surprise. There was no one around them anymore. Guiyun sat down on the floor and took the plate and said they probably ran away while they were all focused on saving the old man. They are still unaware of their plans. The guy walked forward and shouted that you can't just sit and wait. The man put his hand forward and shouted, what is he doing? He shouldn't act like an idiot. The guy grabbed the door and shouted, damn. Locked. The man grabbed him by the shoulder and threw him aside and said, he told me not to act rashly. He shouted, doesn't he understand? Or does he want to die? The guy sat down on the ground, and the main character said that he thought he was right. The residents are clearly hostile towards them. It's better than just sitting and waiting for them to be killed. The man said there were no leads. What makes him think there are no traps on the street? He said they had an ally who could help. He asked who? Guiyun pointed his finger at the red window and said the bride, since the marriage is with a ghost, she herself is probably a victim and wants to help them. The man folded his hands on his chest and looked at him and asked, what if the bride is a ghost? If they want to go, let them go, but he stays. The guy shook himself off and said that he was with him. Qinglin thought that he was too decisive. He's clearly hiding something from them. She said she was with them. Qinyu offered his hand to Guiyun and said that he should then. He said, Grandpa, he better get some rest. The girl took the man's hand and said that she would be with her uncle. The main character put his hand on his shoulder and told him to take care of them, they will be back soon. He needs to call for help if something happens. He said he. And then the guys approached the house. Guiyun opened the doors, everything around was saturated with a red atmosphere. The guy looked around and shouted, this is bad. Why are there strange figures in the bridal room? Guiyun said, otherwise the wedding would not be called ghostly. He put his hand in his pocket and felt for the tiger talisman. Turning to Bai Ling, he said, Madam, let me introduce myself. They are random travelers who find themselves drawn into the celebration. He offered to run away with them. Is she willing to help? The bride ignored him. He took off her scarf and shouted in surprise, paper figure? Are they all just figures? But where is the bride? Qinglin thought, was he really so sure that she existed? He's a newbie, obviously. But how does this guy know something that other players don't? A sign appeared in front of the main character, which said that he must save Bai Ling's fiancée. Reward 3,000 achievement points. He thoughtfully put his fingers to his chin and thought that Bai Ling was the person's name. Why save paper figures? Well, where is she? Qinglin looked at him and sighed and said, let's see, maybe there is some kind of mechanism in the room. She started tapping on the walls and climbing into cabinets. She moved candles and checked every corner. Suddenly she shouted, found it. The bed core is empty. Guiyun turned around and folded his hands on his chest and thought that when the old man was poisoned, she was the first to understand what was going on. Smart, brave and skillful girl. It's not that simple. The guy walked forward and took the paper figure in his hands and said to move. He threw it on the floor. Guiyun looked at this, and then they grabbed the edge of the bed and he said, take it. They moved up and saw the descent down. The guy asked if they really needed to go down there. The main character clenched his teeth and said, let's go. Guiyun and Qinglin stood below and held candles while the guy walked down the stairs. Qinglin pointed her finger forward and said that there is only one road here. Guiyun said that there is no other way. The guy walked forward and kicked something. He asked in surprise, huh? He fell to the floor in horror when he saw something in the shape of a human hand in front of him. Qinglin picked it up and said, not real, just like those paper figures. 1, 2, 3, 6 parts. They must match those on Earth. The guy took the leg and asked why all the figures were torn to shreds. Guiyun said no. Don't they think these figures look like them? In ancient times, there was a custom according to which a bride from a wealthy family was accompanied with a dowry upon marriage. It included not only jewelry and paintings, but also people. And they are the dowry at this ghostly wedding. The bride is not real, the bridal rooms are fake. What can we say about the dowry if his thoughts are true? The real room is downstairs, and these figures hint at their future. He ran forward and shouted that there was no time to think. Let's go. We need to find a bride quickly, otherwise the remaining trio will not be happy. They ran forward and the guy, pointing his finger straight, shouted that there was something there. They found themselves near a wooden door. Guiyun opened the door, and when they walked inside he said, "Well, of course she is here." In front of them, surrounded by candles, lay a figure. Qinglin lifted the scarf from her face and said that she was alive. Still breathing, but apparently unconscious. Guiyun looked at Bai Ling and asked, "Can they wake her up?" Qinglin said that she was not sure. She can't even imagine how to help her. Guiyun turned around and, turning to the guy, told him to come here and help lift her up. They lifted her into the original room and the main character said, "Be careful, you can't hit her on anything." Suddenly a girl and Qinyu ran into the room. They shouted, "Help! Save them!" Guiyun asked in surprise, "What happened?" The old man said, "Residents. They're going to kill them." The girls said that everyone is armed with hoes and sickles. They attack everyone they see. That guy is trying to stop them. Guiyun thought for a moment, and then told them to take the bride with them. He will go out and see what is happening outside. Qinglin agreed with him. There was a man standing on the street. There was a magical creature behind him. He said that he was warning. One more step, and the ghostly servant will begin to act. The villagers jumped towards him, but the ghostly servant repelled the attack. Guiyun thought, "Ghost servant? Any special power in the game?" Suddenly the man screamed in pain. Guiyun thought, did he attack his master? He looked at his back and thought, how many scars there are on this. Is this really a payment for the power of a ghost? A sign appeared in front of him, which said that he was congratulated on his complete analysis of the system. Guidance, Ghostly Servant of Pain fragment not selected. You need to unlock all 9 illustrated guides and get a reward. He said the Ghostly Servant of Pain is a fragment of the Echo level. The ghost is born and exists thanks to pain. He enjoys urine and others. Attacking with a long tail, each attack deals fixed damage to the player. The girl went outside and watched the battle with admiration. She said, "What strength?" Guiyun said that using a ghost servant is expensive. He won't last that long. He then turned to Qingyu and asked, "Grandpa, did he look around the courtyard after they entered that little house? Did you find a way out?" The old man said yes. There is a low wall on the western side that they can climb over. Guiyun raised his hand and shouted, "Guys! We need to run to the western part." The resident raised his stick and shouted, "Stop them now!" The resident jumped on the girl. She screamed in horror. Qinglin jumped into the villager and kicked it aside. Another resident was approaching her from behind. She grabbed him by the arm and turned him over and hit him on the ground. Then she kicked him between the legs. The guys looked at this in confusion. She dusted off her hands and told them not to stand like a pillar. "Hurry up." They then ran forward and met another crowd of villagers. The man asked, "What now?" He can't hold out any longer. The servant only has 3 hits left. Guiyun took out the talismans and said that he would have to take desperate measures. He looked at it in surprise and thought, what a powerful talisman, where did he get it from? Guiyun, holding the talisman in his hands, causing everything around to be immersed in a yellow aura, said, "The 3 celestial masters who owned it in the past. Burn the evil spirits that walk at night." He threw the talismans forward and said, "Demons and monsters," he orders them to flee. The talismans fell in front of the residents, and there was a powerful outbreak. The man said, "What great power! Does he have more? He should use it." Guiyun said that the talisman allows one to drive out demons. They are still human, right? It won't bother them. He asked what to do. The main character pointed at himself and said that they were sticking to the original plan. Then he jumped onto the wall and shouted, "Let's run!" After some time they hid in haystacks. Residents walked past them with pitchforks in their hands. Qinglin stuck out her hand, and then they grabbed the villagers and began to choke them. When the body in his hands weakened, he looked around, and then hid the body behind the wall. After a while, they entered the building and Qinglin said that there were more and more residents. They needed to escape. The guy asked, "Where should we go?" Guiyun looked down and thought that the banquet was ruined, the bride was saved, but the ceremony was not over yet. They missed something. Bai Ling, who was lying on the girl's lap, coughed, and she shouted that she seemed to have woken up. Guiyun was near the bride and asked, "Madam, is she okay? Does she remember her name?" She grabbed her head and said that her name was Bai Ling. "Where is she? What are they?" Guiyun said that they were a bunch of losers who got caught up in the wedding ceremony. "Does she know anything about the ghost marriage?" She continued to hold her head and, looking down, said marriage, she doesn't know for sure. She was captured a couple of days ago. She doesn't know why she was taken. The main character pointed his finger at himself and said, Miss Bai, if they don't put an end to the ceremony, everyone will die, and she obviously won't have a good ending. Does she really remember nothing? She thoughtfully put her fingers to her chin, and then, raising her index finger up, shouted, Oh, right. She remembered how the villagers were talking among themselves. The man asked, Is the path to Nyenyang Temple cleared? The guy said no, but nothing can be done. The ceremony cannot be postponed. Guiyun clarified, Nyenyang Temple? Does it have a statue of the goddess of the underworld? He leaned on his knee and rose to his feet and said that he seemed to know how to put an end to this ghostly ceremony. The guy screamed in fear, Is he crazy? This place is absolutely haunted. Guiyun picked up the talisman and told him not to worry, he already had a solution. Talisman of Invisibility. Hides the body, transforms it, making it invisible and inaudible. The effect grants invisibility to everyone within a radius of 5 m for the duration of the incense sticks. Then the talisman lit up and he said that if they touch someone while using the spell, they will immediately become visible. They must be careful. Then their bodies began to glow, and they ran out of the building. Guiyun said that they only have 3 sticks, they need to speed up. After some time, the guy was hiding behind a tree from a resident, he waved his hand. He smiled and said that they really couldn't see them. Guiyun clenched his fist and told him to go down. After a while, they passed through the ghost staircase and found themselves near the ancestral hall. Then they opened the door and went inside. Qinglin pointed to the side and said that behind the hall there was a path leading to the top of the mountain. The main character looked at her and said that then they are going. Then he opened his eyes in surprise. In front of them lay a book, Chronicles of the Village. He took it and started reading. 17th year of Emperor Long's reign. Black torrential rain enveloped the earth. That same year there came a great famine. People began to devour each other, and evil spirits descended to the earth. They walked around the building and continued up the stairs. Guiyun extended his hand to Bai Ling and told her to hold his hand. She thanked him. And then he turned around and said, By the way, does she know what that black rain is that was mentioned in the village chronicles? She shook her head negatively and said that no one could answer for sure, there were so many rumors. They say that the emperor was angry and killed even the most worthy of the officials. The heavens became angry and black rain fell from the sky. She put her hand to her chest and said that she heard that it was the same rain in Guangzhou, but... The guy made a face and said that they didn't expect the mountain to be infested with monsters and ghosts, right? Qinglin hit him on the head, and he grabbed his head and shouted, Ah, for what? She told him to stop talking nonsense. Guiyun looked at the top of the mountain and thought that, judging by the chronicles, it was the temple that protected the village from the black rain. But all the villagers became monsters. The man put his hand in front of the guys and told them to stop. The girl asked, What's happened? His face became covered with sweat, and he said that they were there. In front of them stood a huge gate with horns on top. They looked at this one in confusion. The man shouted, Faster! They need to leave as soon as possible. The gate opened and a dark figure appeared in it, which said that since they dared to come here, they would not return back. It smiled madly and the man shouted, Ghost servant! It threw its whip forward, but the monster grabbed it and asked, Exorcism? Is he from the reincarnation sect? The man raised his fist and shouted that he had no idea what he was talking about. The monster said, Oh, it's a wild ghost. He won't be polite to him. He took out the vessel and the ghostly servant was drawn into it. Guiyun shouted in confusion. He was able to subdue the ghostly servant with one movement. The man grabbed his head and fell to the ground. When the monster swallowed the servant into the vessel, he put the lid on it and said, Great. It is very rare to take such a spirit for yourself. Bless his ghost mother. The man lowered his head and then collapsed with his whole body to the ground. The monster threw his head to the side and, smiling madly, asked that, judging by her outfit, she is the bride at today's ghostly wedding? Bai Ling fell to her knees and shook all over. She put her hands in front of her and shouted that he should not come and touch her. Don't. He thoughtfully put his hand to his chin and said, Snow-white skin, bones like jade, these idiots have found the perfect bride. The ghost mother will be happy. Guiyun put his hand to his side and asked, Why would the goddess of the underworld need a bride? He threw his head in his direction and asked how dare he interrupt him, little one. Does he want to die? Beads of sweat flowed down Guiyun's face. He gritted his teeth and thought that he should not be afraid. He must continue to bide his time. Pointing his finger at himself, he said that they, who were accompanying the bride, still didn't have much left, right? The monster smiled even wider and said how interesting. He's wearing strange clothes. He grabbed him by the shoulder and said, he still dares to snap at him, that his death is inevitable. He got close to his face and asked who he thought he was, boy. Guiyun put his hand in his pocket, and then smiled and said that he was just a traveling traveler. According to tradition, if they do not know the cause of death, then after death they become wandering spirits. That's why he dared to ask. The monster created a flame in his hand and turned around and asked, does that mean he doesn't want to become a spirit? Does he want to know more about the wedding? The main character looked at the ghost-shaped flames in his hand. The monster said he was lucky. Today he is in a good mood, so he will tell you. Of course, either mother needs this marriage. A ghostly wedding, during which the bride marries Vajrasada. As for them, they are part of the sacrificial ritual. They don't have to worry, he will make sure that not even a wandering spirit is left of them. He stepped forward with his staff and directed many ghosts in their direction. Everything around was covered in smoke. A column of bright light burst out of the smoke and the monster, turning around at this, asked what was happening. A huge tiger appeared from the smoke. Guiyun held his figurine in his hand. The guy fell to the ground and said that he thought he was going to die. Buddy, he saved him again. He put the figurine forward, the display said, White Tiger, restoration of spiritual power 85%. Looking at the others, he shouted for them to leave here quickly. Blocking one attack consumes 15% of your spiritual power. We need to buy some time. Qinglin looked at him in surprise and then, waving her hand, said, let's go. They won't bother him. The monster looked at it and thought, an artifact of spiritual transformation? This is a middle-class weapon. But he did not sense any spiritual power from this boy. How is this possible? He lowered his staff and asked, who is it really? Guiyun spread his hands to the sides and smiled and said that he said so, he is just a wanderer. Maybe they'll just keep talking and not fight? The monster created a symbol from his hands and shouted, you bastard, how dare he? A creature appeared under his feet, he shouted, forward. Phantom flame. Many spirits flew towards him. Guiyun created a shield. The monster tilted its head to the side and smiled and said that it was in vain that he relied on his weapon. When he runs out of spiritual energy, he will skin him and tear him apart alive. A drop of sweat ran down the protagonist's face. He thought, damn, he's caught. Then he turned around and ran in the opposite direction. The monster, continuing to send attacks, asked, what is it? Not so sarcastic anymore, brat? The main character sat down on the ground and thought that if he continued to stupidly dodge, nothing would come of it. We need to seize the initiative. He put his hand to the side and shouted, White Tiger. The magical creature ran forward and swung its paw over the monster. But he managed to create a barrier and asked, does he think that he will not be able to predict his actions? Without the support of spiritual power, relying only on weapons, he would not be able to break through the soul banner. He clenched his fist and said that after his death, he would use the phantom fire of the vengeful spirits and improve this magical weapon. Suddenly, talismans flew into him. Qinglin stood nearby, holding the remaining talismans in her hands. The monster turned around and asked, does she still want to die? Suddenly his barrier began to become covered with cracks. He shouted in confusion, what was happening? Guiyun shouted, come on. Qinglin threw a few more talismans forward. The tiger continued to press on the barrier. The monster jumped to the side and asked what they did. Guiyun sighed and said, it seems that his spiritual energy has been exhausted before. He shouted that it was impossible. While the statue of the mother. The main character interrupted him and raised his index finger up and said that as long as the statue of the ghostly mother of the ghost is intact, the spiritual power cannot. The monster asked, to become exhausted? In the 12th year of Emperor Long's reign, a sudden mountain flood caused the mother's statue to be lost. The search lasted 3 months, but everything was in vain, and the poor residents were flogged 30 times. But after the statue returned, a great famine set in, and the villagers died one after another. Guiyun looked at the book and said, what do you mean the only punishment was beating with a whip? But before, people were simply killed. Then he closed the book with a slam. Qinyu ran towards him, holding the figurine in his hands. He shouted that he stole it, he took it. The monster shouted, oh he! He rushed to meet him. Guiyun blocked his path. A tiger stood behind him and he asked, well, where was he going? The monster pointed his finger at him and asked if he was just trying to distract him from the very beginning. Guiyun said exactly. They planned every step. Villains should not keep diaries and reveal their plans. It is too easy to reveal their weaknesses. Then he threw him the book. The guy stretched his fists and said how he had been waiting for this. Guiyun reached for the figurine and thought, a statue of a ghostly mother. A sign appeared in front of him, saying that the mission was completed. The ghost wedding is over. He is congratulated for finishing the game. He needs to wait, additional rewards are being calculated. The old man asked, does the system say the game is over? Is this really true? He put his hand on the statuette. Guiyun said yes, he also saw the notification. It's over. The girl stood next to them and cried loudly. The guy adjusted his cap and asked, why is she crying? No one is injured or dead. What a mess. Qinglin hugged the girl and looked at him menacingly. He raised his hands up in fear. Guiyun looked at the man who was lying on the ground. He asked how he was feeling. She said his vital signs were stable and he had simply passed out. He said the game is over. He looked away and said that he didn't know how long they would stay here. Qinglin raised her index finger and said that the estimated time was between 5 and 15 minutes. The surviving players will then be teleported to the starting area. He looked at her and then turned around and asked, and how does she know this? She spread her arms to the sides and said that he was not the only one who had secrets from others. She then asked Bai Ling if she had any plan. What is she going to do? She turned around and asked if they were really leaving. Suddenly she heard someone approaching them. Several horsemen were heading towards them. Bai Ling said, benefactors, she asked them to stop. These are people from her family. She put her hand to her chest and said that she was fine. Did they come on her father's orders? The horseman descended to the ground and said, Shay Wei of the Leopard Cavalry greets the young lady. He asked for forgiveness for not having time. He deserves to die. He put his hand to his chest and knelt down on one knee. Guiyun sighed and then said that it seemed like they really didn't have to worry about what would happen to her. He then turned his attention to his hand, which began to disappear. Qinglin said that it seemed like it was time to say goodbye. This is where their paths diverge. Shay Wei looked at the pillars of light ahead and said that there was no trace of them left. Madam, who are these people? She put her hand to her chest and said that she didn't even have time to find out their names. The scoreboard said the game was over. The awards are being counted. Achievement points, 14500. The number of completed missions is 4 out of 4. Special missions, 3 completed. Permission to purchase 200%. Unlock the purchase of special items in the store. Special rewards for completing hidden missions, 1 beacon. Guiyun put his hand to his chin and thoughtfully looked at the display and said that the store remains open until the next task. He can study everything more carefully. He thought that all the missions were completed, and the reward was only 14,500 points. This will not even cover the cost of the items used. If you only complete the main missions, then you need several games to exchange points for one item in the store. It's understandable why he didn't intervene. He put his hand to the side and said that his situation was different. He lacks not points but goods from the store. But it was written, does he want to return to the real world? He put his finger on the answer and appeared in the room. He felt his body and said that he was back where he started. He looked at his watch and said that only a few minutes had passed. Suddenly the clock blurred, everything around began to blur. He grabbed his head and said that his head was splitting. What was happening to him? He collapsed on the bed and said that he needed to get some sleep. Everything else will be sorted out tomorrow. The next morning, Guiyun woke up and covered his mouth with a yawn. He walked along the corridor and said, but who is this early? The main character opened the door and Qinglin stood in front of him and asked, Mr. Ling Guiyun? She represents the Human Security Bureau. They asked for his cooperation in investigating certain cases. His eyes widened in surprise. He thought, the Human Security Bureau, that was the name of this organization, wasn't it? He asked, so she didn't just appear in the game for no reason? She also came here at the crack of dawn. How did their organization get his address? She folded her arms and said that Original Sin selects players at random. Their meeting was just a coincidence. And as for the second question, if he cooperates with them, he will receive answers to everything. An armed man stood behind the wall and listened to their dialogue. Guiyun pursed his lips and his body trembled with fear. He asked, the matter she said does not involve killing people or experimenting on them? She raised her hand and said that every player is very valuable. Of course not. As long as he cooperates with them, They will not threaten his personal safety. The main character pointed his finger at the weapon sticking out from the wall and asked, "What is this then?" She moved closer to his face and said that as long as he cooperated with them, they would not threaten his personal safety. She snapped her fingers and the soldier reloaded his weapon. Guiyun raised his hands up in fear, beads of sweat running down his face. He said, Okay, he understood. He agrees to cooperate with them. Then he took his jacket by the stained edge and asked, but maybe they would give him time to at least change. Qinglin looked at the watch on her wrist and said that they were leaving in 15 minutes. After a while he stood near the car. Qinglin, sitting behind the wheel, told him to get into the car. Then they went ahead and she said that yesterday's mission was classified as the most difficult. And the reason they survived was because of him. Thank you, really? But the organization did not find him yesterday. More precisely, it speaks about his personality. Only with the admission of its level can information be revealed. Then she put the gas pedal to the floor and they rushed forward. After a while she stopped at a large building and said that they had arrived. An armed man approached the driver's window and told her to provide her ID. Qinglin extended the card to the special machine in his hands and it said, Human Security Bureau, Special Operations Squad, Team Leader, Ji Qinglin. Verification completed. The armed man moved his hand aside and said, Chief, welcome to headquarters. She thanked him. Some time later they were sitting in the conference room. Qinglin put a glass of water on the table. Guiyun, sitting at the table, asked, but why did she bring him here? She said that he would soon understand everything himself. Professor Bai came into the room and asked, Guiyun, they haven't seen him for a long time, how is he doing? The main character jumped on the spot and slammed his hands on the table. He asked loudly, Uncle Bai, what is he doing here? The professor smiled and put his hands in his pockets. Professor Bai. Famous folklorist, historian and archaeologist. Important employee. He put his hands forward and said that he was doing research, of course. He's a player just like him. However, age makes itself felt. He laughed. Qinglin, addressing Guiyun, said that Professor Bai is the main and most important member of the organization's research group, as well as one of the honorary deputy directors of the bureau. The professor looked at his hand and said, well, it's not worth it. If not for the disappearance of Feng Mian and his wife, the position would not have passed to him. Guiyun ran forward and asked, Lin Fengnian? Did his parents also work in the bureau? The professor said that it seemed like he really didn't know anything at all. Professor Lin Fengmian and Jiang Hongli are considered the founders and elders of the Security Bureau. They were the first to discover anomalies and predict the emergence of original sin. But unfortunately, heaven always takes the best. Guiyun grabbed his robe and asked, so his parents didn't die in a car accident? What happened to them? Are they alive? The professor looked to the side and said, actually. Qinglin interrupted him and, putting her hand in front of Guiyun, said that he had no right to say this. The information is classified. He said he understood. Guiyun asked in surprise, huh? Why? He can't find out details about his parents? Qinglin handed him an envelope and told him that he would have to sign an agreement and become a member of the organization. He looked at the envelope and a bead of sweat ran down his face. She said she wanted him to understand one thing. Signing the contract means that he will become part of the battle against distortion. He will face strangeness, madness, and maybe death. The main character opened the document and said that the documents say that they deliberately do not send people on a mission from which they cannot return. She said that, as she said before, every player is important. They will not sacrifice anyone on purpose. Well, unless this sacrifice helps save more lives. Guiyun signed the document and confidently looked ahead and said that then he would definitely find out the whole truth. At this time they were watched through a huge screen. The director asked what he thought about this boy. Jingyan said that he is impulsive, confident, hot-tempered and arrogant. The director stretched his body and smiled and asked, isn't this great? Then he went to the switch and turned on the light. He asked why it was so dark in here. The deputy director folded his arms across his chest and confidently said that everyone has different responsibilities. He is responsible for doubts, and he is responsible for faith. At this time, the professor squeezed the document and said that he would become one of them as soon as he signed the contract. Then he headed towards the exit and turning to the guys said that he had 2 more projects. Shaoqing will train him. Then he slammed the door behind him. They sat down at the table and Guiyun awkwardly said, that's it. Qinglin stood up from her chair and stretched out her hand and said, Ji Qinglin, former head of the Special Analysis Group of the Human Security Bureau, is now the head of the 2nd Special Operations Group. He shook her hand and scratched the back of his head and said that She said, Lin Guiyun is 20 years old, unemployed. The son is the founder of the organization. Dropped out of his university department. He is not in a romantic relationship, they have suspicions about his orientation. The main character got angry and shouted that it was all right. She said how can he understand, they know a lot about him. As for the bureau, she folded her arms and said that they were an official organization dedicated to investigating all unusual incidents, including original sin. The main character asked, among other things? Are there other anomalous incidents? She handed him the document, and leaned over the table, and said that there were many more of them than he thought. He must take a look for himself. He opened the folder, from which he took out a piece of paper on which was written, 1890 Incident of the Fall of the Dragon. 1930 Ghost Market. 1943 Ascension Banquet. 1950 Water Ghost Incident. 1965 Child Prodigy with the Eye of Heaven. 1962 Cat-Faced Old Woman. Previously, anomalous incidents literally erupted in flames from a mysterious cave. They couldn't afford a repeat. But now the monsters from the cave have crawled out. One of these is associated with original sin. Guiyun asked, did other anomalies disappear with the advent of the game? She said, not really. According to his father's research, they all became like small worlds. They act the same way as black holes. When a very large anomaly appears, all the others are absorbed. Then she stood up and walked forward and said that now working with original sin and its derivative incidents is the main task of their work. She pressed the button and the board lowered behind her. Guiyun asked, what is this? She turned to face him, and then, writing on the board, said that there are 2 categories of derivative incidents. The first is that the players are in control. They accidentally gain powerful powers, and some of them begin to do evil. They monitor and restrict these guys. Guiyun asked, what about the second one? She said, and the second type is derivative incidents. Qinglin wrote the word dungeon on the board and said that the term did not refer to the dungeons of their missions in the game, but rather the ones that manifested in reality. Guiyun, putting the document on the table, asked, can they appear here? She put her hand to her side and asked, does he remember what was written on the official website? Failure of the mission will have serious consequences. Drops of sweat ran down his face and he said, that's it. She held up 2 fingers and said that when all players are eliminated, the mission is considered a failure. And then dungeons materialize in the real world. This is the second type of task they need to cope with. The main character put his fingers to his chin and thought, so this is what threatens a failed mission. Why hadn't he heard about this before? Qinglin extended him a suitcase and told him not to worry. Typically, dungeons are dealt with by veterans of past games. She tossed him a suitcase and told him to hold it. It was his admission luggage. He opened the suitcase and, turning his attention to the gun, asked, a weapon? Qinglin loaded the pistol and, aiming forward, said that he also had a license for this. Later she will teach him how to use it. She then threw the gun at him and told him that it wasn't just given out. Only to authorized persons. He will abuse his position, and it will be easy for the Bureau to get rid of him. Guiyun looked at the gun in his hands. She tossed him the phone and told him that the phone supported a satellite signal. All tasks and communications from the organization will be sent to it. She showed the watch and said that the watch had a special detector built into it. When something unusual is detected, the indicator will light up. There are 6 display colors in total: green, blue, purple, orange, red and white. The lower on the scale, the more dangerous the situation is. Guiyun turned around at the knock on the door. Jingyan entered the office. She asked, Deputy? Why is he here? He asked how long the training would last. Su Jingyan, Deputy Director of the Bureau, responsible for the leadership of the Special Operations Group to combat emergency situations. She said that the main points have already been studied, all that remains is to go to the shooting range for training. He took the piece of paper and said it could wait. Now there is an urgent task. Qinglin took a piece of paper on which was written the mission code, a hut in the forest. Mission type, uncontrolled dungeon. Danger level, night rank. A drop of sweat ran down her face. She asked in surprise, a dungeon? She slammed her hands down on the table and said, but Deputy, he only completed 1 mission. Jingyan folded his arms and said seriously, no buts. This is a task. Either he accepts it or rejects it. Guiyun put his fingers to his mouth and asked if he could find out what the consequences of refusal are. The deputy said nothing special. Simply, the documents he signed will be cancelled, memories of the Bureau will be erased, and he will be sent back to where he came from. The main character thought, what about the entrance test? Show of force? He needs to know more about his parents. He leaned his elbows on the table and said that he accepted the task. The deputy said, wonderful. He will receive more specific information from the analytics department. The deputy then left the office and slammed the door behind him. They looked at each other awkwardly, and Guiyun said that it seemed to him that the deputy chief was somehow wary of him. Qinglin said, in fact, the Bureau usually does not hire players who have only completed the game once, because they are mentally unstable and the likelihood of them dying in subsequent games is high. It is said that Professor Bai and other staff collected his resume to the boss overnight, and his deputy man ruled. Guiyun, hitting the table with his fingers, said clearly, this means that they treat him as if he got here through connections. It seems he has become a burden to her. She shook her head and said that he was thinking too much, and it was her duty to complete this task. She showed him the earpiece in his ear and told him to put on the headset, through which the intelligence team would contact him. This task should not be taken lightly. Containing a dungeon is generally not a task that a beginner who has only played through the game once can handle. Guiyun stretched his back and said that the contract also stated that they were not sent to death on purpose, right? They headed towards the exit, and he said that that deputy chief was indeed the man who ruled. After some time they approached the car. Qinglin got behind the wheel and told him to get into the car and put on the headset. She put her finger to the earpiece and said that she was Qinglin. She was requesting additional analysis on the hut in the forest. She was told that the application was already under consideration. Connection to a private network, connection to the intelligence department. Support representatives are available. Auxiliary representative Yuan Wei is on together. She will provide them with information support. The hut in the forest appeared 36 hours ago. The scale of contamination is 1,200 square meters. The area is currently closed. Currently, the temporary team consists of 3 people, team leader Li Xiuyang, team member Ji Qinglin and Lin Guiyun. This is all the information about the incident from the cabin in the woods. Any questions? Qinglin said no. Guiyun looked at her and said, so the team leader for this task will be a veteran. It seemed that the deputy's plan was simply to see if he had the guts to take on the task. Qinglin remembered this person and said irritably, Li Xiuyang. She advises him not to expect too much from him. He asked why. She said he would know when to see him. After a while, they stood near Xiuyang, who was vomiting into a bucket. Guiyun pinched his nose and asked, is this a veteran? Li Xiuyang. 29 years old. A disciple who abandoned the Palace of Heavenly Mastery. Experience completing the game 5 times. Eternal alcoholic. The percentage of tasks completed is extremely low. Qinglin said that now he knows why she said that he cannot be relied on. Turning to the armed men, she told them to give him a bucket of water. With ice water. The man shouted yes. She poured water on Xiuyang. He jumped up on the spot and asked what was the matter. Has it started raining? She said, Li Xiuyang, they are on a mission now. He looked at her and said, is this voice a blue bird? And then he lay back on the ground and turned over on his side and said, he must be sleeping. How else would he have seen the blue bird? Qinglin irritably placed her fingers on the bridge of her nose and told him to be doused a few more times. If he still doesn't come to his senses, then we need to call a couple of people and get him out of here. They must follow her to the scene. The man said accepted. Guiyun asked, did he just call her Blue who? She put her finger to the earpiece and said Blue Bird. This is her previous code name in the Information Reconnaissance Unit, just like the killer whale. The killer whale said that Sister Qinglin used to be their captain. The armed man pointed forward at the huge building. The main character thought darkness? Anomaly? No. This feeling of imbalance. It's like squeezed in fragments of reality. This means that this is a dungeon that has gotten out of control. His watch lit up, and looking at it he asked, is there an alert? Could it be that the anomaly escaped from the dungeon? Qinglin said that this is not an anomaly, but a distortion. She raised her index finger and said, put on your protective suits at 7 o'clock. Orca, she needs to locate them to find out if the distortion is spreading. Guiyun asked, what is distortion? Do I need to wear any equipment? She said they didn't. She should have taught him this after using a firearm, but after real experience he would figure it out on his own. Anomaly is a general term for all types of supernatural occurrences. Monsters, terrain, rules. And distortion is an anomalous appendage, something like a virus or radiation. They infect ordinary people, corrupting and turning them into monsters. A protective suit can slow down the speed at which it spreads to people. Guiyun let go of his head and thought, since anomalies distort ordinary people, why don't they need a protective suit? Wait a minute, ordinary people? He asked in surprise. They don't need this just because they are players? Qinglin folded her hands on her chest and said correctly, because they had long been subjected to the largest anomalous distortion. The killer whale said, Sister Qinglin, after comparative calculations, the target distortion radius increased by 50 m in 2 hours. There is a tendency to further spread. Qinglin said the scale of the distortion is growing rapidly, which means the level of danger has become higher. How long will it take to mobilize resources as quickly as possible? The killer whale looked at the monitor and said that it was too late. There are no special operations officers left in the city on standby. The village is 800 meters away. Qinglin thoughtfully put her finger to her chin and said that she should prioritize the evacuation and then apply for support. Guiyun put his hand on her shoulder and told her not to worry. He thinks he can save the day. She turned to face the party and said that the cabin in the forest was classified as night level, indicating the presence of at least one or more supernatural phenomena or rules. This should not be taken lightly. Their goal is to investigate. You need to be prepared and evacuate at any time when danger comes. Then she reached for the door handle and, opening the door, suggested that they try to act together. She walked inside and told them not to separate. Then she turned around in surprise. Guiyun and Xiyang looked forward in surprise. The main character put his finger on the earpiece and said, Killer whale. Qinglin disappeared before their eyes. What the hell is going on? She said that Qinglin's position was lost. She repeats, Qinglin's position is lost. She can't contact her. Guiyun looked at the phone and said, not to mention the special satellite positioning, is there any signal? Xiyang hung on his shoulder and said, was when they were on the ground. He then moved away and said that she had been moved to another location. It is obvious that it will not be possible to contact her. Then he took out a bottle of liquid and, while drinking it, said that she had mentioned the problem with space when the advance group, the killer whale, had been sent before. She said that the advance group had indeed encountered a spatial fold phenomenon. The length of the corridor exceeded the actual length of the building, and after opening the doors the situation became chaotic. But before this there had never been a situation of forced movement in space. There have been changes in the rules of the dungeon, and the reconnaissance team recommends abandoning the operation and waiting for reinforcements. Xuyang looked at Guiyun with a smile and said the rules of space are the most unpleasant thing, so how? Does he want to give up everything? The main character took a deep breath and exhaled, and then said to give him a minute. He thought of having the system open a store to exchange rewards. At this time, Qinglin looked at the phone and repeated that she was calling the killer whale. Please reply as soon as you receive the message. The signal has disappeared, which means it will not be possible to communicate. Looks like she's gotten into something. She looked at the door leading to the exit and said, it turns out, she needs to get out of here. Then she ran towards the exit, but found herself in the same place. Her eyes widened in surprise. She looked around and asked, spatial fold? She repeated this action several more times and stopped, grabbed her head. She said that no matter where she went, she would always return to the same place. Since she can't leave, she'll have to continue exploring from within. At this time, Xuyang asked, is he going to come in? The main character said, of course. Then he took several confident steps forward. He put his finger to the earpiece and told the killer whale to repeat the information about the key to solving the dungeon. She said the group had received 3 tips so far in passing. The art museum is run by a family of 3. Some in the troupe received a spiritual vision and saw their picture of life. Second, each statue contains remains, indicating a large number of those killed. And finally, while transmitting, the group encountered a wandering killer. Firearms have a negligible effect on him. Guiyun thoughtfully put his fingers to his chin and thought, which made it clear that he was the core of the mutation. Suddenly a ghost appeared behind them. It said, they had finally arrived. Their bodies trembled with fear. They turned around and looked at the ghost. It flew forward, and then moved its face to Guiyun's face. It flew further and said behind her. Xiyang asked what they would do. Guiyun said that they will follow up. Then they hid behind the wall, and watched as the ghost flew through the painting. The main character turned to his partner and asked, he's a Taoist, which means it's not his job to deal with people like that. He raised his thumb up and smiled and said that there are no ghosts in this world. He is a convinced materialist. Guiyun pointed his thumb at the ghost disappearing into the basket, and said that this is what he will tell her. Then they approached the painting and Xiyang, running his finger over the image, said that this was an anomaly. An anomaly associated with powerful distortion. Only now it manifests itself in the form of a ghost. The killer whale said that according to the data, anomalies often manifest themselves in the form of legends or miracles from classical literature. It is now believed that people's thoughts influence their generation. Guiyun looked at the back of his head and asked, "What's the difference?" Xiyang raised his index finger and said that it was as if someone had been struck to death by lightning. In ancient times it would have been believed that lightning punished him for bad deeds, but now it is believed that this was due to the fact that he stood under a tall tree during heavy rain. He took a sip of his drink and said that the first is superstition, and the second is science. Guiyun looked at the painting and asked, "So what did it want to tell them by calling them to this painting?" The painting showed a girl waving from the window of a building to a guy who was on the street in front of the building. He thought, "Is she asking for help?" Xiyang pointed his finger at the ghost emerging from a nearby painting and said, "Over there." They ran to this place. The painting showed a girl hiding behind a wall while a man was hacking at a guy with an axe. Guiyun looked at his partner and said that she was warning them to be careful around their father. Suddenly, a stone knight appeared behind them, an axe in his hands, and his eyes glowed bright red. It swung an axe and the guys jumped to the sides. Guiyun took out the talismans, and Xiyang pointed a magic sword at the knight. Xiyang landed next to him and asked, "Talisman? So he is also a Taoist?" Guiyun looked at him and asked, "Is he a Taoist?" "He's a materialist." He smiled and awkwardly said, "Professional deformation." Guiyun paid attention to the stones that shook on the floor in front of him. Then the stones flew back and he shouted, "Be careful, that's not all." The knight began to recover with the help of small stones. And then he swung at the guys again. The main character shouted, "Let's run!" At this time, Qinglin was walking along the corridor and lighting her way with a flashlight from her phone. She wondered how far she had already walked. 300 m? 500? Is this space distorted, expanded, or circulating somewhere? Suddenly a silhouette appeared in front of her, also shining a flashlight. She asked, "Who is here?" Yijiang asked in surprise, "Huh? Did she run into someone again?" "She's not that uncle's drinking buddy, is she?" Qinglin asked, "Drinking buddy? Who did she see before?" She said that with one handsome guy and an alcoholic uncle. They seemed to say that they were looking for their comrade. "Isn't this about her?" She said, "That's right, they are her comrades." "Who is she?" She thought that the advance party had blocked off the cabin in the forest as soon as it appeared. No civilian could enter it. "I have questions for this student." Yijian looked around and said that she was a streamer and was broadcasting about the supernatural. She asked, "Streamer?" She struck a cute pose and said, "Super cute AI Yijian. Haven't you heard?" Qinglin said no. She made a tearful face and asked if she doesn't surf the internet at all. "She's so popular." Then she raised her hand up and said that not only did she find nothing, but she was also warned that she had entered prohibited territory. She leaves. She can look for her comrades herself. Qinglin turned around and shouted for her to wait. If she wants to leave through the main entrance, she won't succeed. She asked what she meant. In what sense does she not be able to get out? Qinglin said that a spatial fold has appeared in this run, and if the problem is not solved at the root, the people who entered here will never be able to leave here. She ran forward to the exit and shouted that she didn't believe it. She's just trying to intimidate her. And then she ran out and found herself in the same place. Horror was visible on her face. Qinglin folded her arms and asked, "Does she understand now?" She asked, "How can this be? What's happened?" She fell to her knees and said there was no way out of here. Qinglin approached her and extended her hand and asked where she encountered her companions. She needs to meet them. She said it was in the studio behind the corridor. They walked forward and she said, "An aquarium from which you can't get out." Just like in that story. Qinglin looked at her and asked, "What story?" She said about the ghost killer at the art museum. Legend has it that the owner of this museum one day went crazy, killed his entire family, then disappeared. And those who enter here after this are forever lost and cannot find a way out. Until they meet that crazy father, becoming new victims. Her face went crazy. Qinglin asked if she could tell you anything else. Yijian looked at her in surprise. She said that she hadn't told at all about the man who was killed by his father and became a ghost, constantly looking for a scapegoat. Right. Yijian grabbed her hand and electric discharges appeared from it. She walked away and her whole body became covered with electricity. She screamed and turned into a ghost. She screamed indignantly when she found out about this. Qinglin raised her hand covered in electricity and said that from the very beginning. She has terrible acting skills. They are in the same space, so she could not cross paths with Lin Guiyun and that drunk. Unless she knew about everything that was happening here. She raised her fist and ran forward, hitting the ghost. She then struck a few more times and Yijiang shouted that she would pay. Father will come for her. Qinglin then grabbed her head as everything around her began to blur. She opened one eye and asked, did she run away? Then she heard the scraping of metal on the floor and thought, heavy footsteps and the sound of a heavy object being dragged. Is this the same father from the story? At this time, Guiyun and Xiyang hid in one of the rooms. He said everything seemed to have calmed down. The main character confirmed his words. He put his hand out to his side and said that now it seemed to him that he had often seen a similar scene in a horror film. The two main characters thought they were saved, and just as they are breathing a sigh of relief, the killer appears and says he has found them. And then he stabs everyone with a knife, and that's the end of the story.